Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Talk to another writer. Who? Oh, Jesus. You throw a rock in here, you'll hit one. Do me a favor, Fink. Throw it hard.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I am a writer and film critic, and today I'm going to be talking to Dr. Neil Fox, and I've got to give him his doctorate because I use my doctor in my Twitter profile, which is Dr. Jonty, D-R-J-O-N-T-Y, in case you want to follow me. Neil is a academic, a teacher, and a film writer, a screenplay writer. He is working on a book currently for the BFI about music films. He has written several shorts and a feature, It's Natural to Be Afraid, in 2011, a feature film, Wilderness, 2017. And he's written a bunch of other stuff. He's been an associate producer working with Mark Jenkins on his latest film. And we're going to talk about a whole bunch of stuff. We're going to cover a lot of that ground. And we're also going to talk about the way screenwriters and writers generally are portrayed in movies. So that's going to be a sort of broad theme of our conversation as well. It was great fun talking to Neil. He's also got a podcast which I should plug, The Cinematologists, which I've been following and listening to for some time now, and it's brilliant. It's really good in-depth analysis, and yeah, it's also done really lightly and in a way that's very, very listenable. So you might want to check that out if you don't already. If you enjoy the episode, please remember to like and subscribe and do all those other things which continue to spread the word. It's working, so please keep it up. If you haven't done it already, then what's wrong with you? Come on, please, come on. But before you do any of that, enjoy the conversation.
So yeah, I kind of started screenwriting on a dare, really, at college, sort of at the sixth form college. I was, sort of the usual sort of opinionated 17, 18-year-old who was sort of getting into movies and telling everyone that the movies that we were watching were terrible and why they were terrible. And someone sort of literally sort of said, you couldn't do any better. And I thought, well, I wonder if I could. And I didn't. That was when I stopped being really arrogant, but it was a kind of an honest question to myself, like, could I do better? Like I am sort of being this kind of person who's saying, this is bad and this is bad. But what am I doing to really understand that or kind of do anything about it? So I started to write this feature film when I was at sixth form college. and like on a Word document, and it was at the time when you could sort of look at screenplays that were being released. Tarantino's screenplays had been released and stuff, and I managed to sort of find one in the library, and so I just sort of copied the format and started, and quickly realised that I was in way over my head. This was actually really hard, and my fledgling attempt was terrible. I mean, I still have it somewhere. It was called Darkness on the Edge of Town.
Ooh, is that like
the Springsteen?
I was going to say, yeah, Bruce Springsteen reference.
Yeah, it started a tradition which I still have, which is stealing titles from songs. I'm a big fan of that. Hopefully the scripts have improved. But then around that time, I met someone in the year below me who was sort of the brother of a friend of mine. He was making sort of short films but wasn't writing, and we sort of bonded over a love of 50s B movies. And I said, I've just started writing. I can write one. And he had this title called They Came for a Day, and sort of the Ray Harryhausen kind of Ed Wood style. And so I wrote that, and it was a sort of 20-page short, handwritten on on a legal pad. And I sort of handed it to him and said, there you go. And he liked it and was like, well, maybe we should make this together, which we did sort of a few years later after we both took a diversion into starting a film festival in Luton, which is where I'm from, and then sort of starting a film company in Luton to, sort of do film festivals and make films. And we sort of stayed there for pretty much, up until I moved to Cornwall 9 years ago, doing all sorts, which included making a number of short films. So that's how it kind of started.
How do you find the sort of the discipline of writing short films in terms of, as you say, you sort of try also have done a feature. So is there a really big difference, or how is it for you?
I do think there's a big difference. I really like short films. I've always really liked short films as a form to watch and to program and to make. I've always loved the freedom that they give. They seem to have more freedom than sort of narrative features, because they don't have the same expectations on them. So they're almost kind of sketches of ideas, or really kind of concise ideas that wouldn't play if you then had to consider the things that often have to go into sort of feature-length films. So even though, I sort of made a feature in 2016, I've since, made a short after that, and sort of, there's a couple of other shorts that I'd really like to make, I never saw them as a stepping stone. And I love teaching them, so I teach screenwriting, and I love sort of trying to get students to think that you don't need to worry about all of those expectations that come from writing a feature. And when I wrote my feature that we made, I tried to really sort of not fall into those expectations and try to sort of push against them. But it's certainly easier with a short. And there just seems to be, sort of a real purity to them that I think is sort of underappreciated.
Those expectations, that's an interesting sort of concept to think about for a moment. Because I was thinking about it the other day of how there are certain sort of rules that we hear these days about feature film writing and stuff like likability of your main character. Yeah, it's something that for a short it doesn't really matter if you like any of the characters, because you don't have to spend that much time with them, I guess.
Yeah, and also they're not really characters in the same way that they are in a longer work. They're often sort of impressions of characters. They maybe embody one or two elements that are sort of that you can sort of hook into for the duration, and or not. It might just be a pure concept where the character is a cipher to get through the narrative. And I think it's interesting that my students kind of are trying to make those kind of 10-minute shorts that I make them write as complex in terms of the characters as a feature, because I think that's the expectation. And increasingly with television, that there's such an expectation that we know everything about these characters at all points. We know their entire backstory, their entire psychology, and I think it feels quite reductive, even in sort of narrative film, to have to know everything about a character rather than sort of just spending time with them. And certainly in shorts, I hate it when you sort of try and, or when you sort of see a short film which is essentially a 90-minute feature crammed into 10 or 20 minutes. It's like let that form do its own thing.
It's like writing a haiku or or that sort of what's that? There's a discipline in Japanese calligraphy where you don't take your brush off the paper. You have to do everything in sort of one swift movement. It's that sort of discipline.
Yeah, that's a lovely way of thinking about it.
Thinking about the shorts as well that have sort of successfully been sort of transformed into feature films. I mean, I'm thinking of the most recent example I can think of is probably Whiplash. Damien Chazelle. I mean, in a way, that might be sort of a dangerous example to give your students, because that makes them, instead of doing a short film, they do a scene from a bigger film.
Yep, and most of them have seen that, so they love Chazelle, and they come in, with that approach, and that's a long-standing approach. I think, when I programmed a film festival, I would often see shorts that were a scene from, or a almost like the first act. You would get these sort of 25-minute or 30-minute films which would have like the first third of a feature, and it was essentially like a calling card to try and get the money to shoot the whole thing. And I've never been a huge fan of that, but I can see the attraction. I can see the attraction of saying, look, here's the story in a kind of capsule form. Here's the sort of central conflict. Here's what it's going to look like. And I think, a short like Whiplash has enough tension in it to work as a short, and I probably prefer the short to the feature in many ways. But I think that it can work, and I think it often I think there's that film Mama as well. There's which was a horror film for a few years, which was quite similar. I think you can really sort of cleverly capture what's going to be the feature. And Censor as well was a good example, because that was they had a short called Nasty, didn't they, as well, which was again very different, but sort of told you what the tone and the feeling and the kind of the overall theme of the feature might be.
Yeah, Censor sort of struck me as when I was watching the film. I've never seen the short Nasty, but while I was watching the film, I was thinking, this is a really good short that's been a little bit stretched out. I didn't feel it quite sort of won its right to exist as a full-length feature film, or maybe that's too harsh. Maybe it just didn't quite sustain it for me, I guess.
Yeah, I know what you mean, and I think that often that there's those transitions can obviously involve a lot of people giving opinions about stuff, and sometimes you can feel where what might have been, kind of evocative or mysterious about a short is kind of really flattened out by a process where things have to be kind of clearer, or the lines have to be a bit more joined up. I think, you look at something like Saint Maud, which obviously is kind of similar time in terms of sort of release, but you look at Rose Glass's shorts, which are not directly linked, but certainly capture something that I think she was able to sort of maintain in that film, and with a bit more control than maybe you sort of see in Censor. And it's almost like they want to take the atmosphere and put a load of characters and a quote unquote plot in, but those things can often butt up against each other and not always in the best way.
I think I was talking to Paul Cronin on one of these podcasts a while back, and he teaches screenwriting as well, and he was saying how if his students give him the first 5 pages of a screenplay, he always refuses to read them. He wants to read the last 5 pages. And he argues that the first 5 pages, you've told me you've got a situation, and only with the last 5 pages do you tell me if you've had a story as well. And I sort of wonder if that in a way is one of the advantages of doing a short, is that you can do a situation. You don't necessarily need to do a story.
No, absolutely. And I think, some of my favourite shorts are a situation, And I think the thing is, when I've written shorts, that's what I've been interested in, is, the short I made before Wilderness, which is my feature, which was called It's Natural to Be Afraid, which is another song title. That was very much, I had this kind of almost this moment that I conceived. I thought, this would be an interesting moment, an interesting sort of setup. By doing a short, I was able to kind of explore the kind of the dynamics of the moment, and then hint to, who these people were that were involved with it, and sort of we filled in a little bit about some of the kind of the context of, who they might be and emotionally when they meet, but that was kind of it. I was interested in the meeting rather than their entire backstory, or even the legacy of what happens after these two people meet. Like that didn't seem as interesting as exploring that sequence where these two people who don't know each other are kind of thrown together in this what feels like, or it's constructed like a fateful moment. And it's that was interesting, which might be a scene in a bigger film, but often for me, if it's an event or something that inspires a script, it's usually going to be a short, rather than if it's kind of a character situation that I'm interested in exploring. That's when a feature might emerge.
Yeah, which sort of brings us back in a little way to what you were mentioning earlier, which is how our culture has now become sort of dissatisfied with just having a story that exists, and it sort of has to, fill in all the, imagine like in the 70s you had a film like Marathon Man. If you had that film come out today, you would then have like a film about what he was doing before he became Marathon Man, a spin-off film about his brother beforehand, an origin story of the baddie. There'd be so many, and then maybe a nostalgic sort of TV show about the making of Marathon Man as a fictional thing. It just seems like, am I really interested in watching all of these sort of peripheral sort of filling ins? And I know there are the exceptions that are good, but the thing that makes Luke Skywalker interesting is that he's a guy who just lives in the desert and nobody knows who he is. And to find out that, okay, actually he's this guy and he's done this and this happened 10 years before the actions that you see in Star Wars, it just goes on and on and on. Or did I freeze a little then?
And one of the things about, Luke Skywalker, which I think is interesting as well, is like it's that we, and I've had this conversation many times with my students, which is, we don't really know anything about him at the start of the story. What we learn about him is who he becomes by watching him do the thing, So he's a bit of a brat, he's a bit of a dreamer, he's really annoying at the start, but there's a sense that we're kind of in this deserted place with this individual, so we're forced to focus, in that kind of classic Hitchcock way of making you unable to empathize or sympathize or engage with any other character, and then so you're kind of on the journey with that character. And I think it does work because what he learns about himself, we learn about him at the same time, because we're watching him become. And there does seem to be a real shift at that level of filmmaking. I certainly don't want to make it seem like, because I think that it is that's the space that defines the conversation and defines what people think is good or bad, for better or ill. There does seem to be this kind of desire to fill in the gaps of everything. I think that's an interesting idea, that Marathon Man, universe, because you're probably giving people some ideas. That would be really good. Let's find out about it. And maybe they can hire John Schlesinger's son to do a kind of nostalgic sort of sepia tinted, sort of spin-off reboot 30 years later. But that's the way of thinking. It's like what information can we provide? That what certainty, what recognition. And I know for me that's not the cinema I've enjoyed, and it's not the cinema I like to write. I try and leave space, and I like films that leave space for me. I don't want to just come in and tick a load of boxes about something. I want to do something a bit deeper.
Yeah, and I mean the problem is, and I'm going to start sounding like a granddad type of figure now, is that the actual sort of properties that they're remaking and redoing, it seems to have become so routine to do them that they're not even great properties. They make a film about chips, they make Dukes of Hazzard, they've got TV shows of Hawaii Five-0 and Magnum PI, and it's just like, what, these things were only okay when they were when they were first out. It's not like what is even the audience for this? Yeah,
that's a good question, and I certainly I wouldn't presume to know what that audience is. It's certainly not an audience that I've got. They're not coming to watch my films. But yeah, I think it's hard to not sound kind of dispirited by the trend. And I thought it was interesting on your chat with Kim Newman, where he was talking about, was it Clayface in the Marvel? It's not as if the possibilities within the material that the studios have at hand has been exhausted. It's a very thin sort of stream of properties that they then keep going back to when there is more there. So I'm not sure that they really know who their audience is. I think they've sort of they've tapped into one, and they're gonna bleed that audience dry until it doesn't work, and then they'll try and figure something else out.
I was thinking about Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade the other day, because that has in its sort of the very first section with River Phoenix, it kind of has everything that's bad about today's television, but it does it in a self-aware and an almost parodically accelerated fashion. You know, within 5 minutes you find out how he got his hat, how he got his scar, how he got his name, how he got his whip, how he got his hat, and it's just like, what, that happened in one morning, when he apparently lives in Monument Valley.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like so over the top I can forgive it, but it seems like somebody was watching that with a pen and paper and was going, oh, okay, that's how I'm going to do the next 25 years of film and TV programming.
But that's what we're talking about as well, isn't it? The difference between a short and a feature. Like, that's a short sequence that works really well in the context of, a fun way to set up a character, or to step outside the character that you've known for 3 films and do a little bit of an origin story tongue in cheek. But yeah, that's the whole franchises are built on that sequence that's stretched out to sometimes 2.5 hours, and it's like, it just doesn't need that, and it's not necessarily that interesting. And Spielberg probably kind of knew that, and I wonder if George Lucas wanted to write a longer version, and that's what they kind of argued it down to. Like, let's do it in 3 shots.
Yeah.
Which is cinema, isn't it? Rather than anything else.
Well, I mean, they did do a young Indiana Jones story TV show.
It was a TV show, yeah.
Yeah, which I remember Vic Armstrong, Vic Armstrong, the stuntman, directed a a few episodes because I read his autobiography, and he was very he was very proud of the work he had done on that. So to sort of move on to the idea of, so you're writing screenplays and everything. Do you, when you watch a movie and you see like a screenwriter depicted, do you sort of go, there I am, now I'm the hero of this story?
Yes, I feel very seen. I think younger me did. I think that seeing Barton Fink quite early was very much a, probably an unhealthy attachment object, to be like, oh, actually there's, it's an honourable, terrifying, kind of really unappreciated and ultimately destructive thing that I'm doing. And in your early 20s, you're like, yeah, this seems like something to pursue. I like that kind of romanticism, the kind of the doomed romanticism of it, I think is and I think, but as I've kind of got older, I kind of realise what that is sort of tapping into in terms of the history of screenwriters in Hollywood. Well, I guess kind of not necessarily the history of screenwriters in Hollywood, but certainly screenwriters, sort of post sort of, in New Hollywood and the sort of the rise of the auteur theory. I think that they've always been at the bottom of the food chain, but certainly sort of accounts of screenwriters in Hollywood in the sort of the classic era aren't all universally that they were put upon and unappreciated and, kind of ignored. That seems to have come in later as directors have sort of taken more prominence, whether that's widened the gap or just made writers feel like they don't get the same credit, sometimes literally the same credit, is
tell me about it.
And I think that there are a number of films that really feed into that. But there are also films that kind of push against it and have a sort of, the screenwriters are a different kind of figure, particularly in sort of classic Hollywood films, I think. I
mean, I agree with, when I first saw Barton Fink, I definitely had that sort of like, there's the writer, that's me, that's the, but rewatching it recently, rewatched it last week, and I just thought, oh my God, that's not the story at all. The story is, this guy's a complete asshole who's basically got one idea that he keeps, and he just has no receptivity to anybody else, or any other idea. He's got one story. Every time he sort of starts typing, it's, a tenement building in New York, the fish hawkers cry echoes down the street. And it's, it's like, he's an example of just what you don't do as a writer. It's not that Hollywood's, Hollywood isn't the baddie in that film. It's kind of, it's kind of the writers are kind of all damaged individuals who just can't do their jobs.
And that's something that sort of comes up again and again. It sort of changes with adaptation, I think. You know, the brilliant Charlie Kaufman film, where he's his own enemy in a really kind of direct way, and he does have a kind of very ambivalent relationship to Hollywood and to the industry, but it's kind of the idea of the industry more than it's the actual reality of it. You know, he can't get on with, you know, the way that the stories have historically been formulated, and that sort of wears him down, and ultimately, you know, he kind of gives into it in such a beautiful way. I think it's interesting to look at something like Barton Fink and then look at Hail Caesar and see how the sort of the film characters, the characters in the film industry are sort of positioned in those films. I think, like Barton is very much a kind of railing against the system, which might be because the system's corrupt, or it might be because, like you say, he's not as good as he thinks he is, which I think is a very common feeling for a lot of writers of any kind of, you know, medium. It's like that kind of, so what do you do? Well, you lash out and you say that, you know, I'm not appreciated and I'm a genius who's not understood, which is easier than admitting that you're kind of mediocre and you shouldn't be doing it, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, it's that idea of like, I'm writing, you know, a theatre for the people, films for the people, and then the guy who lives next door who keeps saying, you know, I could tell you some stories, and he's just like, he's too busy spouting off to actually stop and listen to the guy who turns out, by the way, to be, you know, spoiler alert, a psychopath.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to that idea of the audience as well, doesn't it? You know, like, who is the audience? Well, you know, historically the audience has not always veered, and certainly not in huge numbers, towards, you know, the work that often maybe screenwriters think that they should. You know, I think there is a kind of snobbery in a lot of filmmaking, and it obviously, you know, it kind of starts with the script that this is going to be, you know, eat your vegetables, kind of is it Jimmy Fallon who said that?
Trevor Noah.
Trevor Noah, you know, like that. I think that, again, like a lot of the time, people don't like, you know, the reality of what they know their life is being exposed to them. And I think that a lot of films about screenwriters sort of tap into that kind of neuroses of wanting to do something honourable, but knowing that really, you know, that there are other things at play, including, you know, just wanting to be famous or wanting to be successful or wanting to be seen to be good, you know, and all of those kind of competing voices sort of can infect the process of writing quite a lot, I think. I think that often the portrayals of screenwriters in sort of classic Hollywood have not always done the best job of sort of making it something which feels glamorous or, you know, of value. And obviously kind of Sunset Boulevard is the great example, where he's essentially, you know, babysitting. you know, he can't get the work, he's not doing very well, he's kind of doing bits and pieces, but he's essentially kind of babysitting, and not even babysitting a star, babysitting kind of star who's no longer, you know. So even if that's not, you know, even if that's just a job that they picked, the work it does in sort of making screenwriters feel valued is quite significant, because it's such a significant film, I think, you know, and that's always in people's minds, that that a writer is essentially expendable and can be shunted off to do all this other sort of menial stuff, rather than doing the serious work of art that sits at the core of the movies.
When I was recording the first ever episode of the podcast, or maybe the second, I wanted to put together like a series of little clips about about writers as a sort of intro, like to go with the music and everything at the beginning. And the one that I got that I really loved, and I should use it, but it's Geisler from Barton Fink. Geisler, yes, Mr. Geisler, Geisler, and when he says, "Writers, Fink, you know, talk to a writer. This is Hollywood. Throw a rock, you'll hit one. And do me a favor, Fink, throw it hard." Tony Shalhoub's amazing. Oh, just like, he's in that movie for 2 seconds and he just rules it completely.
He pretty much rules everything he turns up in. I love Tony Shalhoub so much.
Yeah. Big Night is one of my favorite films ever, I think. It's such the scene where they make the frittata at the end, which is an entirely, you know, dialogueless scene that would be,
But many people would say that that's not screenwriting because there's no dialogue. So they'd be like, oh, that's just kind of improvised, or it's, even though it's obviously a very important scene that the film doesn't work without, it doesn't work without that kind of quiet sort of real-time coda, I don't think.
There's no way that wasn't written. There's no way that wasn't written. That, everything gets written in the end. It might not be sort of written in the very first draft, but even like kung fu fights, somebody sits down and writes them out and works out what they're going to do.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous 2-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Yeah, and I've been fortunate, with my collaborator and sort of been on sets where screenwriters have been included in that, because they carry the story, they carry it all. And I think often when you sort of see that a director has run off and thinks that they know and they hit those moments, often the story can fall apart because the person who's really carrying the permutations of what it can be in their head has been excluded from the process, which as a producer as well, I always feel is kind of mad. Why would you not want someone who can solve those problems or add something in the way that actors do all the time while the film is being made?
I often think that 90% of the job of a writer is sometimes to answer really basic questions like, wait a minute, what are they doing in that room? Why is that? Oh, why would they come back? Or what's the, and it's those sometimes stupid questions which are absolutely basic and fundamental.
Yeah, the logic of things is really important sometimes.
To broaden it out a little bit, you mentioned Sunset Boulevard earlier, and he's kind of, you say babysitting, but isn't he kind of a prostitute? Isn't that his job essentially? Isn't he just there to basically be eye candy and / or service Gloria Swanson's fading matinee idol?
Yeah, I was trying to retain a little bit of dignity in the profession of the writer there, John, but you just blown that out the water.
I'm not sure if I prefer to be a prostitute or a babysitter today. There's not much of a. But I was thinking of Breakfast at Tiffany's and George Peppard's character in that, who's basically sort of a Truman Capote stand-in, but he's figured as a gigolo. He's, Holly Golightly is the prostitute, but also so is I can't remember his name, but so is the writer and the narrator of Breakfast at Tiffany's, Paul Varick. I've remembered his name.
Well, I think again that maybe is one of the insecurities that writers have. That the process of writing, regardless, is one of constant compromise or sort of paying lip service or doing something that you feel is kind of taking away the kind of the purity of the thing, and that I think probably seeps out in a lot of ways in terms of these representations that they feel. It certainly happens in adaptation. He just feels kind of dirty doing the thing, but he's compelled to do it anyway. There's certainly a sense that there's a kind of darkness that lurks within the writer in terms of what they're doing and why they're doing it, which I think the film industry is such a great way of exploring that, because it's just seen as innately seedy and shallow and sort of out for the bucks,
and occasionally getting hit by rocks thrown by Mr. Giesler. Who would you say are your favourite screenwriters that you sort of almost treat like a director, in the sense that I'll go and see a film by that writer?
Well, Charlie Kaufman is probably the obvious one.
Did you read his novel?
I haven't. It's sat there. It's literally sat by the bed, keeping the house up because it's giant. But no, that came out while I've been working on my own book, so it just felt like that was just too much of of sort of a distraction. But I do want to, and I'm very curious as to what his writing on the, sort of his novelistic writing is like compared to his screenwriting. Yeah, he, and I think that's probably a lot to do with kind of my age, sort of being John Malkovich at a kind of a young age, and again, sort of he just gave a whole new, well, it's a weird one, isn't it? Because he gave a whole new sense of like the dignity of writing and sort of the art and genius of screenwriting in a way that you could really see how it was his imagination that was coming up with that stuff, and his ability to not just have the ideas but to deliver them in such interesting and intricate ways, I think is amazing. But of course he was not happy with that and wanted to direct, which I completely understand, but also kind of made this kind of symbolic, unattainable thing, where it's like there is only one, there is only one of him. I think historically it's Billy Wilder either working with I.A.L. Diamond, particularly sort of in the late stuff. I love that relationship, or Charles Brackett in the early days. I think he was a great writer. Weirdly, even though I don't direct, I think that some of my favorite writers are directors who seem to be able to write really, really well, which would be Wilder or more recently like Paul Thomas Anderson. I think is a great writer, and yeah, those are probably my sort of my favorites in terms of the ones whose work I go to when I'm kind of teaching what you might call classic narrative screenwriting.
I always think of people who are sort of writer-directors like the Coens and Tarantino as well to some degree. And sort of, I've read their screenplays, but I always read them with an idea of they know they can do this. They know that they've not got to give this to somebody who's then going to say, ugh, this isn't going to work. Or so there's an element of it where I think there's not much I can learn here because they have a really big advantage.
And what's interesting about that is if you could, what's to learn, because when I say to my students if they're interested in those filmmakers, is not necessarily the Coens, but someone like Tarantino, or they love Wes Anderson, or like look at how those screenplays have evolved over the course of their career.
Wes Anderson, the fascist.
Oh God, isn't everyone a fascist now?
Apparently,
is he a fascist now? I haven't.
There was this silly. I mean, it's silly. There was. I went to university in the early '90s, and if you didn't call someone fascist every day, you sort of lost your card. So I'm a little bit more tolerant than some people seem to be. But basically, there was somebody on Twitter who said that his films are fascoid. Sort of had this word and people were saying, how dare you accuse him of being a member of the Nazi party? And I sort of thought both things were equally ridiculous. That like, no, the person is sort of reacting to Wes Anderson's sort of, kind of gnawingly irritating quirkability and apoliticalness, which seems to be always putting our sympathies with very rich white men who tool around third world countries and without any scratches appearing on their, self-regard. So, I as you can tell, I'm slightly ambivalent about Wes Anderson as well. But anyway, no, he's not a fascist. That's
okay. Sorry.
For the record. Yeah, what a relief.
I haven't been on Twitter today, so I didn't know if I'd missed big news.
Yeah.
That he'd held a rally or something.
A torch. Could you imagine? I mean, actually, the aesthetics, the lateral panning of Triumph of the Will would be right up his alley.
Yeah, well, I think there's certainly a kind of an aesthetic formalism there that you might appreciate.
Going back to where I rudely interrupted you.
Well, now I can't teach it without knowing that. Yeah, but what's interesting about that is the earlier screenplays are geared towards, someone might see this, a funder, or someone we have to convince, But then as they get to the point where that it's kind of set, the screenplays change as documents, and they become much more about the thing that they know they're going to make, and this is exactly how they're going to do it. So they're kind of, the early ones are kind of nice reminders that whatever happens to filmmakers, often a lot of them start in similar places in terms of having to have a document that looks a certain way to do a certain thing. Apart from Shane Black's Lethal Weapon script, which I don't know if you've ever read the original one that got sold for like $1 million, but it's available online and it's absolutely glorious because it doesn't look anything like a screenplay and it's got nothing to do with the film that you kind of see, but it's so beautifully written and it's so engaging and exciting, and that's the kind of, again, like a Kaufman-esque thing where it's like this happened once, someone wrote this thing, sold it for $1 million, and then everyone thought, great, this is what I'll do, and of course they couldn't because they weren't Shane Black.
Lesson number 1 of the screenwriting course today is going to be born as a famous screenwriter.
Always helps, I find.
Yeah, be Francis Ford Coppola's daughter and you'll be fine. I mean, yeah, that's That Bruce Robinson's screenplay for Withnail and I think, is another sterling example of that, where everything in that screenplay, the stage directions, the scene setting, everything is perfect. Yeah. And he kind of films it word for word as well. He's not no messing about with improvisation for he. If you're looking at lessons that you can learn from screenwriting, I often, or from reading screenplays, sorry, I found it really instructive when I look at some screenplays like from Blade Runner, for instance, where because obviously that film is so much about the director's vision and about the Sid Mead and his visual, his suggestions as a futurist, that getting to the screenplay and looking at that, it's a really bare. It feels like a very bare skeleton in comparison.
And that's kind of the conventional wisdom, is that's what it is. It's the blueprint. It's the scaffolding. It's the skeleton that becomes the thing. And as a screenwriter, I like to think they're a bit more than that. But I certainly, I do think that what's on the page should be the start, and it should be a really it should contain everything that you need to know to make the thing work, not to necessarily, I don't like writing directions on the page. I've got a really good director I work with. He's better than that. He's also a really good DP. I'm not a DP. I don't really think visually, so why would I write, this is the way the camera moves? I have no idea how the camera should move, but I know that these things have to happen in this scene for it to work. And I hope that my word choice, which is what I think screenplays are really important tools for, is is creating the seed in the collaborator's head of how to do the thing that is going to bring it out. Barry Jenkins' screenplay for Moonlight's a great example. I mean, okay, he directed that himself, but the word choice on the page, you can tell how the music's responded to those characters. You can tell how James Laxton has been able to create these images, because it's there in the words that are describing the place and the people and the action. It's all, and that's where I think screenwriting is really valuable. It's not just this happened and this happened and this happened. It's between that and just describing everything like you would in a novel. And I think that's where the art is as well. Is how do you make it a document that becomes a film, but also a compelling story that kind of gets collaborators excited, that gets actors interested in, this feels a bit messy or a bit nuanced, or I can play around in this space because you're saying this here and you're saying this here, and it's just those good collaborators who know that that's intentional and can sort of play around in that space, I think is key. And that's the only time when you're writing you really get to write, because a lot of it is formatting. And a lot of it is trying to be clear for production, and that's quite boring. So where's the space to do the job? And if you're like me, you're a writer who doesn't direct, that's even more limited. I think that a lot of writers who end up directing don't have to worry about that, because they'll bring all of that flair and imagination to bear in other ways.
I always try to think of it as like a mood board. Everyone talks about mood boards as this sort of big thing of presenting a document which will give, and I think, well, what if you should really be doing that in the script as well. I mean, yes, I totally understand the efficacy of those things when you're trying to get financing for a project and everything, but that same sort of intentness of I really want to evoke something should be in the script, the original script. That's
really interesting, the mood board idea, because I teach filmmaking and students make mood boards all the time, but you can tell the difference between a mood board where a student has thought about the depth of the story that they want to tell and knows the work that they're trying to sort of tap into and evoke, and students who've just put blue scenes from films in Google image search and then taken all of those films and put them in a mood board, and so you've got Bergman next to Nolan, and you're like, how's this going to work? So, but again, I think that's the same thing. It's like it should be on the page, and I think that at the end of when you write a script, whether you've done enough to do that, or whether you are just sort of scrabbling around and hoping that it makes sense or that it works.
How do you see the film that you're writing? I mean, do you I hear a lot of people or read a lot of interviews with people, and they're sort of saying he'd shot it in his head already, he had it in, especially directors obviously, but as a writer I always find it, I'm always looking where to put my foot next, so I find it difficult to think of it in a much broad way, and I certainly don't have the film in my head.
Yeah, no, I have a film in my head. It's probably not a very good one. When I'm, he says about the film as it's finished is hopefully better. But I think that like I have a kind of a sense of the movements and a sense of the place and how the characters might move around a scene in order to try and get the emotional beats. Talking about process is always really hard without sounding ridiculous and saying things like emotional beats, but I'll do my best.
Men in tights. How hard can it be?
Thank you for bringing me back to earth, John. I appreciate it. But so and an example in the feature that we made, the opening sequence, I saw the opening sequence in my head really clearly, and almost to the points where I wrote it as cuts, which I very rarely do. But that's how it sort of came. So I was like, that's how I'm going to write it. That's how I see it opening the film. And then gave it to my collaborator, and we were both producers. And he sort of said, the first thing he looked at was like, this is expensive opening. And I was like, I don't think this is how it should open necessarily. Like this is, but this is how it came in my head. And I know it's expensive because all of it was set dialogue in a moving car, which for a micro budget film is a sort of a big no-no in terms of cost. So I said, like, even though it looks like it's very prescriptive, I'm not tied to this being how it's filmed. It's just this is how it needed to be written in order for me to get it on the page. And he didn't shoot it like that at all. It's very, very different opening in Wilderness, but the feeling was the same. Like it captured something of what I'd written in terms of the dynamics of this relationship at the start of the film and how it was kind of setting the tone that would then be sort of dismantled as the film went on. And I think that happens quite a lot where I sort of see a scene in order to write it, and then in the process of making the film it's improved, or it's changed, so or I'll be told, actually we don't need to film this, or what if we filmed it like this? And it's like, oh, actually that's kind of what the scene is about. But if I'd have tried to write the visual story in a more elaborate way, I might not have left what it's really about in order for a director to be able to do that. So I'm quite conscious of that again, I'm interested in the characters, and I'm interested in the dynamics, and I'm interested in the story as I see it, rather than, oh, this is how it's got to look. I'm not really interested in that. And I like the process of watching it happen. I like working with actors, and I like seeing it being directed, or seeing a DP kind of. I'm like, wow, I would not have thought to shoot it like that. And I'm kind of amazed that that's what they saw in the script. They think, oh, this is the way of doing that. I like that, because more than anything, I like filmmaking. I like watching filmmakers work, which I get a big thrill out of.
I mean, I think to do this, you have to sort of be able to do something which is paradoxical, which is take your ego out of the equation, but at the same time not do that to the point that you're just being rolled over completely, and that's the sweet point between those two things is incredible. It's like yoga but not a slug, something along those lines.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that that's a difficult position for screenwriters historically, where the knowledge that it is they generally generate the story, or at least the storytelling in the sort of classic Hollywood studio system. They come up with that, but then they have to leave it behind, and it goes off, and they're not usually part of it. I think that's quite difficult, and indie film changed that in many ways, in good ways, but it's still a difficult thing, and it's still how do you sort of marry those two things, knowing that you are responsible for the sort of the nucleus of it, but also that ultimately once you're finished your job, there's so many stages for it to become a thing that you're kind of, unless you're a producer, you're not really part of. And then when you see the film at the end, it's so far away from where you were that it's hard to sort of reconcile what you've actually done in the first place.
Yeah, it's like last year's fingernails. They once belonged to you, but no more. What about? I mean, one of the things that I think is hardest as a screenwriter specifically, as opposed to any other kind of writer, and to compare it to other kinds of writers such as novelists who sort of perhaps have more cultural cachet, is the idea that any major novelist who is gonna, their stuff is all going to be published. I mean, especially if they reach a certain level of success, even their juvenilia is going to be, to some extent, archived and pored over and attended to. Maybe not published as specifically, but even then, maybe absolutely early stories by Raymond Carver or whoever will get an outing. Whereas screenwriters, even you look at IMDb and you look at like best screenwriters, the Robert Towns and the William, the Chaveskis and they have like a handful of film credits. They have like 10, 15, maybe 20, but they're vastly fewer than what they've produced in their lifetime, what they've actually written. I mean, how do you deal with that?
Really, I think that's a really hard thing, isn't it? I think, and again, it comes back to the fact that if you're a poet or even a novelist, or increasingly, certainly, the thing that you write can be released into the world at the time that it's finished. You write a novel, you could self-publish it, and it would be the novel that you've written. But screenwriters have never had that. Like, you write the screenplay, and I say this to my students because, when I try and puncture the bubble, like, no one, when they get to the airport, says, oh, they've got the latest unpublished Robert Town. I'm going to pick that up for the beach. People don't read screenplays for fun, apart from people who are trying to learn more about screenplays. They're not a piece of writing that exists on its own terms, unless like you say, that the film has been made and then people want to kind of go back in. And that's hard to know, that writing the thing is no guarantee that people are ever going to know that this thing exists. And that more than probably kind of other types of writing, I think that the percentage of work, that if you're actually a working screenwriter, I think that's the difference as well. Like you say, a lot of, if you become a novelist who's published, the chances are, unless it's a complete disaster, that the next, if you can maintain a pretty broad spectrum, a kind of a consistent streak, your work will be released. There's no guarantee as a screenwriter that even if you have one hit, or you have one film that's made, that the next one is going to get made. And so many are written and never made, or taken away from you and rewritten. It's a very precarious profession, and I think that eats away at screenwriters. I think that's why many, even the screenwriters you mentioned there, like Paddy Chayefsky, was not a screenwriter by trade. He did other forms of writing, and why there are so many writer-directors, particularly sort of post-Hollywood system in America, and sort of internationally, why so many auteurs wrote and directed their own work and continue to do so, because it's more control over the thing that you've got, but it's also another job. You've got the benefit of being able to do the other thing, and I think it also is kind of, it's one of the things that is in representations of screenwriters, that fear that this is make or break, and why so much of Hollywood films about screenwriters are about compromise, about I want to get something made, and I want to be in this world, and I know I might be selling my soul, but the reality is that if you don't, then you might not get another bite of that cherry.
I was reading about Michael Cimino of the Charles Eldon book, who, again, he came on the podcast to talk about it. And there's this description of Cimino has a room that's just absolutely jam-packed with screenplays that he's written over the 10, 20 years that he's been out in the wilderness. And I've come across that so many times, that, the screenplays that Terrence Malick has written from the 1970s on, and there's screenplays that people have worked on, and big famous people. And it sort of occurred to me, well, why doesn't anyone, when these guys die and this stuff might become available or whatever, why don't they ever just sort of like, oh well, we'll take the screenplay by such and such? And it's just like, that would happen with a novel. Charles Dickens dies, he leaves a manuscript behind, Mystery of Edwin Drood, where it's a half a novel, don't care, we're publishing it. But with screenwriters and even directors, the minute you're dead, your stuff is worthless, because if nobody is pushing it, then nobody is doing it. I mean, unless I can't think of an example of someone who's sort of like made a film out of it. I'm sure there have been 2 or 3 that's made a film out of a sort of a dead person's work, screenplay.
Well, the most famous one is AI, isn't it? The Spielberg and Kubrick.
Yeah, good shout.
But again, that's interesting because people didn't know what they were watching. Were they watching a Kubrick film, or were they watching a Spielberg film, or a mix of both? And what was whose, And again, I think that comes back to the fact that people know that regardless of what's in the screenplay, that transition to film is, and I look at something that was edited like The Other Side of the Wind, that was, because I know what of this is Wells's script and vision, and what is an attempt to try and honour that, and what is an attempt to just do something else entirely. Like, I think it's complicated because of what screenplays are, but I think I like AI because I like the fact that I like messy films anyway. But I like the fact that you can see a filmmaker with a very different sensibility trying to honour someone else, and also try and not just present what was maybe on the page and not just assume, oh, this is what Stanley would have wanted, but to try and have fun with it. And it is, it's kind of tonally messy, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that it's interesting because of that. And I think that some of the ways that, and what was surprising about that was when it sort of came out that people thought, oh, this is definitely a Spielberg thing because it's got a kid looking melancholy. And then sort of going back to the source, it was like, oh no, that was Kubrick. That bit was, and that was interesting. I thought that there was, people tried to read it in terms of who did what, and it wasn't clear, which I think that film was probably due a reevaluation with that distance now in terms of seeing it for what it is.
I always am surprised at how much Spielberg gets sort of tagged with the old sentimentality stuff and everything. He can be a gross sentimentalist, no doubt about it, but he always strikes me as a very cruel filmmaker. I don't think anyone could have made Jaws who didn't sort of, to some degree, savor the fact that some of these people are going to get chomped up.
Yeah, there's definitely a kind of a balance of sort of fear and loathing in the with that sweetness, even in something like E.T. I think it's right in there.
Listen, Neil, before our Zoom meeting is unceremoniously hacked off, I'm going to ask you for your recommended film book. What would you recommend for our listeners?
Well, I'm going to pick two because everyone does, but one from a sort of film-making, screenwriting hat, which is one of your previous guests, actually, Paul Cronin's Lessons with Kiarostami. Kiarostami is one of my favourite filmmakers.
He's amazing, isn't he? Yeah.
Oh, just great. And, and a beautiful storyteller, a reminder of what you can do when you're not bound to a very narrow sort of set of expectations of what a story is and how it can unfold. But that book is just full of Kiarostami talking about cinema and art and life and how they all sort of fit together. And I just massively have defaced it with underlinings, and it's almost become a kind of a book that I go to a lot to remind myself of the kind of stories I want to tell, the kind of teacher I want to be, the kind of person I want to be. I think it's got such wisdom and sort of gentleness and joy in it. I find it absolutely inspiring. And anytime I'm thinking, oh God, like there's no hope for cinema, I kind of go back to that and think, actually, there are filmmakers that have made beautiful work that sits outside expectation. And yeah, so that would be, and it's really short and it's deftly edited to allow Kiarostami's voice to shine through. I think it's fab. I love all of his books. Cronin's edited books, I think, are wonderful. The other one, sort of with my sort of film critic head on, because I do a bit of that as well, is Noriko Smiling by Adam Mars Jones. I don't know if you know this book.
No, I don't know.
You should definitely get Adam Mars Jones on. He was a critic for newspaper for a long time, and he writes for sort of the LRB, and he's a novelist as well. But he wrote this book about
the LRB. That's where I've recognised the name from. Yeah.
He wrote this great close reading of Ozu's Late Spring called Noriko Smiling, and it's a very short but really, really wonderful analysis. Kind of starting in that position of why am I interested in this work? Why does this film do? He's kind of trying to unpack his own relationship to the film and sort of really trying to get under the bonnet of what the film's doing. It's a beautiful piece of writing, and he's got a really interesting sensibility. He's got such a confidence that he's not interested in. He's not worrying about how other people view this film or how they view Ozu or how they view Japanese cinema, and he just kind of goes in with his own sensibility and sort of wrestles with it. It's a wonderful book.
That sounds amazing. Definitely, that's going on the pile. Going on the ever-growing pile. Listen, Neil, thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me. It was absolutely fascinating conversation.
Thanks for having me. I love your pod.
Writers come and go. We always need Indians.
So that was me and Neil talking about writers and writing with the help of Tony Shalhoub, which I've dropped a couple of clips into the podcast so you understand who we're talking about, and he does a much better impression of Tony Shalhoub than I do. Tony Shalhoub does, I mean. Also, I should rectify that I talked about the cinematologists right at the beginning of the pod. I should also mention that Neil's co-host is Dario Linares, who I have frequently interacted with on Twitter, and I've read his stuff with great interest as well, so a shout out there to him. I will be dropping a bonus episode later the week from Cannes, where I got the opportunity to talk to some critics and ask them about their favourite recommended film books, and so that will be a slightly shorter mixed bag of interviews later on this week, but I had some really good conversations, and you also get a little bit of a flavour of Cannes, the film festival, from the tired journalists and writers who are there suffering under the sun of the Côte d'Azur. It's like Vietnam. You can't really even understand unless you were there. Okay, that's enough from me. Thanks, Ali Harwood. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Elliot Atkins for the music. Ali Harwood for the art. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Project, and 5 months of peace is just what I want.
Cue the fireplace and your favorite fall movie. There's nothing better than a cozy evening at home with a glass of First Leaf wine. First Leaf is a personalized wine club that delivers right to your door. Sounds magical, right? They get to know your favorite tasting notes, which varietals you enjoy, and whether you prefer sweet or dry wines. So in every shipment, you get bottles tailored to your unique palate. Go to tryfirstleaf.com/fall to get your first 6 wines for just $44.95 with free shipping.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.